Boxes labeled Margaret's clothes had been gathering dust in the far corner of the attic for 5 years. For 5 long years, I found dozens of reasons not to touch them. Today, there are no more reasons. 72 years is old enough to stop putting off the inevitable. The wooden staircase to the attic creaked under my weight, reminding me of my own joints. The house Margaret and I built 47 years ago in the suburbs of Tulsa was aging along with me. We both needed repairs, but I, Garth Ellington, could at least afford new knee replacements. The house, however, had to make do with only minimal repairs. There was neither the strength nor the desire for anything more. The attic greeted me with the familiar smell of old wood and dust. A beam of light from the only window fell directly on a stack of boxes in the corner. I slowly lowered myself onto an ancient stool and pulled the top cardboard box toward me. It was labeled Photos 1970s to 1980s in faded marker. My hands trembled slightly as I removed the lid. Inside were neat stacks of photo albums, from a time when pictures were printed, not stored in the cloud or on computers. Margaret had always insisted on paper copies. "Computers break, Garth, but memories should stay with us forever," she used to say. The first leather-bound album contained photos from our trip to Alaska in 1978. It was an expedition organized by the oil company where I worked as a geologist. Margaret insisted that I take her with me. "You won't notice half the beauty if you only look at the ground," she said at the time. And she was right, of course. In the first photo, we were standing in front of the mountains. Young, smiling, me in a worn field jacket, her in a bright red down jacket. Her blonde hair was blowing in the wind, and her eyes were shining with that special light that is forever etched in my memory. "We were good back then, weren't we, Maggie?" I muttered into the emptiness of the room. The next photo made me smile. Torrens, our son, was about 4 years old. He was sitting on my shoulders, clutching my hair with his little hands, laughing so contagiously that even now I could feel the echo of that joy. We were at an amusement park. Torrens had just ridden his first carousel and was absolutely thrilled. When did everything change? When did my son stop looking at me with admiration and start seeing only an uneducated old man who was of little use? Perhaps it began when he went to college, or later, when he married Keon. Or maybe it just built up over the years. Disappointment in me, in my lifestyle, in my values. I flipped through a few more pages of the album. Family picnics, school graduations, Christmas dinners. With each passing year, Torrens' smile became more and more forced in the group photos. High school graduation, he stands at a distance from me, as if embarrassed. College graduation, a formal handshake instead of a hug. Wedding to Kiona, polite smiles for the camera. Putting down the first album, I reached for the next one. Torrens' school years. Margaret was meticulous in organizing the family archives. Here was every school project, every certificate, every important event in the life of our only son. Here he is receiving his first science award in middle school. I remembered how proud I was of him then. My son, a future scientist. For a man who barely finished college himself before getting a job at an oil company, it was a source of particular pride. "He'll be more educated than us, Maggie," I said to my wife at the time. "He'll achieve more." And he did. A prestigious university, a degree in information technology, a high-paying job at a pharmaceutical company. Torrens had a career I could never have dreamed of. Only somewhere along the way, he seemed to decide that my contribution to his success had been minimal. I sighed and put the album away. Another box caught my eye, labeled Maggie's Personal Belongings. Inside were jewelry boxes, notebooks, and several scarves that still retained the faint scent of her perfume. Underneath them, I found a small velvet box. Inside was a silver necklace with a compass-shaped pendant. My gift to her on our 30th wedding anniversary. "So you can always find your way home," I quoted the inscription engraved on the back. How many times had I seen that compass around her neck? Margaret rarely took it off. She once said it was the most meaningful gift I had ever given her. Not because of its cost. The silver pendant was worth next to nothing compared to what I could afford to buy. It was the meaning that mattered. I spent weeks thinking of something special that would express my feelings for her after 30 years of marriage. My Maggie always valued effort and intention more than material things. Unlike our son and his wife, I remembered our last conversation with Torrens 2 weeks ago. He called a rare occurrence, as I usually call him, to invite me to his 44th birthday party. "We're having a small reception on Saturday the 23rd, he said in a formal tone, as if inviting a business partner. "Pierce said he wants to see you." Pierce, my 16-year-old grandson. The only person in Torrance' family who seemed genuinely happy to see me. A smart kid, observant, with a good heart. He reminded me of Margaret. "Of course I'll come," I replied. "How are you and Kiona?" "Everything okay?" There was a short pause. "Yes, everything's great. We've almost found the house we want to buy. In the Broken Arrow area." "That's the suburbs, isn't it?" I asked in surprise. "I thought you wanted to stay closer to the center." "Prices in the center have become unaffordable," he said, a note of irritation in his voice. "For the same money, you can get a house twice as big in the suburbs. The only problem is the down payment. The bank requires 20%. Torrance never asked me directly for money. Instead, he dropped hints about financial difficulties, how tough the current economy was, and rising real estate prices. Perhaps his pride prevented him from asking directly. Or more likely, he thought I should offer to help anyway. "A big house?" I asked. "4 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, half an acre of land? $225,000 in today's market, that's almost a steal." I did the math in my head. 20% of that amount was $45,000. It was a considerable sum, but I could afford it. I had lived frugally my entire life, saving every dollar I could. My pension from the oil company was more than adequate, and the investments I had made over the decades had yielded a good return. I had over $800,000 set aside, money I planned to leave to Torrance and Pierce after my death. "Sounds like a good deal," I said neutrally. "Yes, if we could come up with a down payment," he said, a note of impatience creeping into his voice. "Kiona thinks we should wait another year and save more." The conversation ended shortly after that. Torrance gave me the time and address of the restaurant where his birthday party would be held and quickly said goodbye, citing his busy schedule. I returned to the present, carefully placing the compass back in its box. After an hour of sorting through Margaret's belongings, I came across her diary, a small book with a dark blue cover and gold embossing. I had never read her diaries while she was alive, respecting her privacy. But now, sitting among the memories of our life together, I decided to open it. The entries were dated 10 years ago. Margaret's handwriting was neat, with a slight slant to the right. I flipped through the pages until I came across an entry about Christmas that year. Torrance and his family came for the holidays. Garth was so excited, he spent several days preparing, but they only stayed for 3 hours. Torrance kept looking at his watch. Pierce was the only one who really wanted to be here. He was so fascinated by Garth's stories about working in the fields. I'm afraid Torrance is growing more distant from his father. Kiona seems to look down on our home. I noticed how she grimaced when Garth suggested they stay the night, as if our house isn't good enough for them. Garth pretends not to notice, but I know how much it hurts him. I closed the diary and put it aside. Margaret had always been more sensitive to these things. I preferred to ignore my son's coldness, attributing it to busyness, stress, and the generation gap. But she saw the truth. I spent another hour sorting through my wife's photos and personal belongings until I reached the last box. Inside were letters. Dozens of letters we had written to each other during my geological expeditions. This was before cell phones and the internet, when the only way to communicate was through paper letters, which sometimes took weeks to arrive. I pulled out one at random, dated the summer of 1984. It was a letter from me, written during an expedition in Montana. "My dear Maggie, it's already the 3rd week of fieldwork, and I still can't get used to nights without you by my side. The mountains here are amazing. You would definitely want to sketch them in your album. We found some interesting shale samples that may indicate oil deposits. The boss is pleased. Yesterday I saw a family of moose by the river. The little moose calf reminded me of Torrance. Just as curious and clumsy. How is he doing? Still building castles out of blocks? Tell him Dad will bring him a real stone with sparkles. 2 weeks left until we return. I'm counting the days. Sometimes I think we could move to a place like this, away from the city, closer to nature. Maybe someday when Torrance grows up." I smiled as I remembered that time. Dreams of a house in the mountains, of living among nature. Dreams that remain just dreams. First, I had to give Torrance a good education, then help him with his first apartment. Then, there was always something more important. Putting the letters back in the box, I came down from the attic, feeling a strange mixture of nostalgia and determination. In the living room, I sat down at Margaret's old desk and took out my checkbook. The down payment on the house was $45,000. I could give Torrance 10 times that amount, enabling him to buy the house outright, without a mortgage. An amount that meant security and years of savings for me, but for him, just a solution to a current problem. But what if it only widened the gap between us? What if he took it for granted as further proof of my usefulness, solely in financial terms? Number. I needed a gesture that would show that I supported his dreams, but at the same time deserved respect. I decided to write a check for $450,000, enough to pay for the house in full and still have some left over. Such a gift could not be ignored or taken for granted. "What do you think, Maggie?" I asked, looking at the photo of my wife on the table. "Too much?" Her smile, frozen in the picture, seemed to say, "Follow your heart, Garth." I slowly wrote out the check, trying to keep my shaky hand from ruining the neatness of the letters. $450,000.00, I wrote in print. Payee, Torrance Ellington. I put the check in a plain white envelope and wrote my son's name on it. Torrance's birthday was in 4 days. I still had time to think about my decision, but deep down, I already knew I wouldn't change it. With this gift, I wanted to show my son not only my love, but also that I had worked and saved my whole life for a reason. Behind my simple appearance and lack of education was a goal: to provide him and his family with a better life. Perhaps this gesture would restore what had been lost between us over the years, or at least start the process. I put the envelope in the desk drawer and closed it. My gaze fell on the wall, where an old framed photograph hung, me, Margaret, and little Torrance in front of the Grand Canyon. We were all smiling, happy and carefree. "We'll try to fix everything, Maggie," I whispered. "I promise." The morning before Torrance's birthday trip was unusually quiet. I usually woke up to the sound of my neighbor's lawnmower or dogs barking, but today even the birds seemed to have decided to keep quiet. I sat at the kitchen table, twirling the envelope with the check in my hands. $450,000. An amount most people save their entire lives to earn. For me, it was money set aside for a rainy day that never came. Margaret always said we should be prepared for the unexpected. The cancer that took her 5 years ago turned out to be that unexpected circumstance, but even the insurance covered most of the medical expenses. The money remained untouched. I took a sip of my cold coffee and walked over to the window. My old Ford pickup truck, bought 15 years ago, was parked in the driveway. It was reliable enough for the trip across town to where Torrance lived with his family. On the passenger seat was a gift bag with a bottle of 20-year-old Glenfiddich whiskey, a formal gift that I planned to present along with the envelope. I thought about how Torrance would react. Would he be surprised? Would he be happy? Or would he just nod, as if receiving almost $500,000 was an everyday occurrence? In recent years, I had found it difficult to predict his reactions. The phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. My grandson's name lit up on the screen. Pierce calling. "Hi, kid," I answered, although he was only a kid by habit. At 16, Pierce was already a head taller than me. "Grandpa," his voice sounded excited. "You're definitely coming tomorrow, right?" "Of course I'm coming. How could I miss your father's birthday?" "Great," his voice sounded genuinely relieved. Well, Dad said you might not come, that you've been canceling visits a lot lately." I frowned. Over the past year, I had canceled only one meeting, when I had caught a cold and didn't want to infect anyone. Torrance seemed to have interpreted that in his own way. "I'll be there, Pierce. I promise. I even have a gift for your father ready." "Really?" His voice took on a conspiratorial tone. "What kind of gift?" I smiled. At his age, Pierce was no longer as enthusiastic about gifts as he had been as a child, but his curiosity remained. "Let's just say it's something your father has wanted for a long time." "Did you buy him a new car?" Pierce suggested, a hint of disbelief in his voice. "No, not a car, but something just as valuable." Pierce thought. "I give up. I'll have to wait until tomorrow." We talked for a few more minutes. Pierce told me about his successes on the school swim team and the upcoming competitions. I listened with a smile, glad that at least I still had a warm relationship with my grandson. "Grandpa," his voice suddenly became serious, "can I ask you something?" "Of course, kid. Anything. If Dad starts, well, you know, just ignore him, okay? He's been really stressed out about work lately. Some important project, tight deadlines." My heart sank. My 16-year-old grandson was trying to protect me from his own son. Don't worry, Pierce. We old folks are thick-skinned. I tried to make light of the situation. Your father can be as stressed as he wants. It won't bother me. After talking to Pierce, I decided to get myself ready for tomorrow's event. I took my only decent suit out of the closet, a dark blue one I had bought for Margaret's funeral. I had only worn it a few times since then. The shirt was a little wrinkled, so I decided to iron it. The iron hissed, releasing clouds of steam as I smoothed out the stubborn creases on the collar. My thoughts involuntarily returned to the past, to how my relationship with Torrance had gradually changed. At first, he was an ambitious but good-natured guy. He studied well and was always eager to learn. Margaret and I encouraged his interest in computers, even though we didn't know much about the technology ourselves. I remember working overtime to buy him his first personal computer, a bulky box that now looks like a museum piece. After graduating from university, Torrance started working for a small technology company. He came to our house for dinner every Sunday and told us about his projects. I didn't understand much about programming and data analysis, but I always listened with interest and asked questions. The changes began about 10 years ago when he received an offer from a large pharmaceutical corporation. It was a prestigious position with a salary 3 times higher than his previous one. He was over the moon, and Margaret and I were happy for him too. During that period, he met Kiona at a corporate event. She worked as an insurance appraiser and, as it turned out later, had a very clear idea of what a successful life should look like. Their wedding was lavish, with 300 guests at a country club. Margaret and I were seated at the main table, but I felt out of place in this luxurious setting. The iron switched off with a click. I put down the finished shirt and picked up the trousers. Memories continued to flow like a river that cannot be stopped. After the wedding, Sunday dinners became less frequent, then stopped altogether. We're very busy, Dad. Kiona has a migraine. We've been invited to her parents' house. There was always a reason. When Pierce was born, I hoped it would bring us closer together again. For a while it did. Margaret often sat with the baby when Torrance and Kiona went out together. But then Torrance got a promotion. He started traveling more, attending international conferences. His vocabulary filled with words I barely understood. Machine learning algorithms, predictive analytics, blockchain. He began to look at me with barely concealed condescension when I didn't understand another technical term or confused the names of companies in his industry. Once, about a year after Margaret's death, I invited him to lunch. We sat in a restaurant, and he talked about his new project. I sincerely tried to understand, asking questions. Dad, he interrupted me at one point. Let me explain it more simply. Imagine you have lots and lots of stones, and you want to find gold among them. He spoke slowly, with exaggerated intonations, as if explaining something to a small child or a person with developmental delays. Torrance, I replied, trying to remain calm. I worked as a geologist for 30 years. I know how to look for minerals, and believe me, I can understand the principle of data analysis if you explain it properly. He looked surprised, then slightly embarrassed, but quickly recovered. Of course, Dad. I just wanted to make sure you understood the basics. After that incident, our conversations became even more superficial. Weather, health, general news. Nothing personal, nothing deep. And then even those conversations became rare. I would call him, and he would respond briefly, always in a hurry. Visits were reduced to a few times a year. Birthdays, Christmas, sometimes Thanksgiving. I laid out my ironed suit on the bed and went to the kitchen to make lunch. Simple scrambled eggs and toast, my usual meal since I was left alone. Margaret always insisted on proper nutrition and cooked a variety of dishes. Without her, I lost interest in food. Standing at the stove, I thought about my last big argument with Torrance. It happened about 3 years ago when Kiona suggested I sell the house and move into a nursing home. They'll take care of you there, Dad, Torrance persuaded me. You'll have company and medical care if you need it. I'm 70, not 90, I replied at the time, and I'm doing just fine on my own. But why do you need this huge house? Kiona persisted. You're alone. You don't tend to the garden. You don't do any repairs. It's losing value every year. I realized then that what worried them was not my well-being, but the potential inheritance. The house that Margaret and I had bought for a song 47 years ago was now worth a decent amount of money thanks to the development of the area. If I sold it now, I would get more for it. If I kept it for the rest of my life, it might fall into disrepair and lose value. This is my home, I said at the time. I lived here with your mother, and you and Pierce grew up here. I have no desire to sell it. Torrance didn't insist, but since then, every time we met, Kiona found a reason to mention some nursing home with wonderful conditions or remarkable staff. I ate my modest lunch and washed the dishes. The day was drawing to a close. I decided to go out into the garden, a small plot behind the house where Margaret once grew roses and tulips. Now there were a few bushes that I tried to tend to, and an old apple tree that bore sour but juicy fruit. Sitting on a bench under the apple tree, I thought about tomorrow, about how I would hand Torrance the envelope with the check. I imagined his reaction, surprise, maybe even shock. Perhaps this gesture would change something between us. Maybe he would finally see me not just as an old man who had fallen behind in life, but as a father who had always cared for him. The sun was slowly setting, painting the sky orange and pink. I remembered how Margaret and I loved to watch the sunsets. "Every sunset is unique, Garth," she would say, "just like every day of our lives." I sighed. If she were here, she would know how to mend relations with Torrance. Margaret always found the right words, knew how to smooth things over. I was straightforward, sometimes even rude. It was a habit of a man who had spent most of his life in the field, among men who were just as straightforward. When the first stars appeared in the sky, I returned to the house. In the evening, my old friend and colleague Aubrey Newell called. We had worked together for over 20 years and kept in touch even after retirement. "Garth, old friend, how are you?" His voice was as energetic as ever, even though he was already 74. "Slowly, Aubrey. Getting ready for tomorrow. It's Torrance's birthday." "Ah, your prodigy. How is he doing in his pharmaceutical empire?" I chuckled. Aubrey had never hidden his opinion that Torrance was too stuck up. Same as always. Busy, successful, planning to buy a new house. "Another one?" Aubrey was surprised. "They just moved to that trendy neighborhood 3 years ago. Apparently, the old house no longer suits their status." I didn't want to go into details about my gift. "Speaking of status," Aubrey changed the subject, "I'm back from that trip I told you about. Death Valley Heart, it's incredible. You should have seen those geological formations. I took hundreds of photos, but they don't convey even a tenth of the experience." In recent years, Aubrey has become fascinated with traveling to geologically interesting places. It's something we always dreamed of doing while we were working, but never had enough time for. "That sounds wonderful," I replied sincerely. "We should go there sometime." "Sometime will never come if you don't set a specific date," Aubrey insisted. "Listen, I'm going to Yellowstone next month. Want to come with me? There are geysers, hot springs, and minerals. You should see the colors." I listened to his enthusiastic story and felt something like envy stirring inside me. Aubrey was doing what we both dreamed of. I was stuck in a rut, waiting for, what? For Torrance to start treating me with respect? For my existence to regain meaning? "I'll think about your offer, Aubrey," I finally replied. "Now is not the best time for planning." We talked a little more, and then I hung up. It was almost 10 o'clock. I checked to see if everything was ready for tomorrow. My suit was ironed, my shoes were polished, and the gift bag with whiskey was on the table next to the envelope. Before going to bed, I picked up the envelope with the check again. $450,000. A huge sum that could change a lot. Buy a new house for Torrance and his family. Or, I remembered Aubrey's enthusiastic voice talking about Death Valley. What could I do with that kind of money for myself? I pushed the thought away. The money was for Torrance. This was my chance to show that I had always cared about him, always thought about his well-being. Maybe this gesture would finally melt the ice between us. The Golden Pine restaurant was located in one of the most prestigious areas of Tulsa. I had never been here before. It was out of my price range, and the atmosphere of such places always seemed unnatural to me. Parking my old pickup truck among shiny new SUVs and premium sedans, I felt out of place, as if someone had mistakenly invited a gardener to a high society party. I looked at my reflection in the rearview mirror. The ironed dark blue suit fit me well, but it betrayed its age with worn elbows and a slightly outdated style. I had carefully combed my hair, but the gray hair and wrinkles were still there. You can't hide 72 years with any suit. On the passenger seat lay a gift bag with a bottle of whiskey and an envelope. I checked its contents once more. A check for $450,000, made out to Torrens. An amount that could change many people's lives. An amount that I hoped would buy me at least a drop of respect from my own son. Sighing, I got out of the car, picked up the gifts, and headed for the restaurant entrance. The glass doors swung open, letting me into a cool room filled with soft music and the low hum of voices. The young woman at the reception desk smiled at me with a professional smile. Good evening. How can I help you? Hello, I'm here for Torrance Ellington's birthday party. She checked her tablet. Ah, yes, Mr. Ellington. The party is in our blue room. Let me show you in. The girl led me through the main dining room to a separate room in the back. Along the way, I noticed that most of the guests were about 30 years younger than me, dressed in expensive clothes, with the confident smiles of people accustomed to success and wealth. The blue room turned out to be a spacious room with high ceilings and soft lighting. Along one wall was a bar, and opposite it was a long table with snacks. Several round tables covered with snow-white tablecloths were scattered around the room. In the center was a small dance floor, although no one was dancing on it at the moment. I counted about 20 guests. Some were standing at the bar with glasses, others were sitting at tables, talking. I noticed Torrens right away. He was standing in a group of people, talking animatedly. He was wearing a dark gray suit, clearly tailor-made, and a burgundy tie. Next to him stood Kiona in a tight-fitting blue dress, her hair and makeup impeccable. She looked like a model from the cover of a glossy magazine. Beautiful, but somehow lifeless. I wanted to go over to my son, but at that moment I noticed Pierce sitting at a table in the back, buried in his phone. I decided to say hello to my grandson first. Hi, kid. Pierce looked up and his face lit up with a sincere smile. Grandpa! He jumped up and hugged me. You came! I promise, I patted him on the back. How are you? How's your training for the competition? Fine, Pierce shrugged. The coach says I have a chance at a medal. I have no doubt. We talked for a few more minutes until Pierce suddenly fell silent, looking somewhere behind me. I turned around and saw Torrens walking toward us. His face was impassive, but there was something like irritation in his eyes. Dad, he nodded at me. You decided to come after all. No smile, no handshake, no hug. It was as if I were not his father, but a distant neighbor he had bumped into at the supermarket. Of course, I replied, trying to keep my tone casual. Happy birthday, son. I handed him the gift bag with the whiskey. I decided to give him the envelope later, when we could talk alone. Thanks, so Torrens took the bag and, without looking inside, put it on the table. Pierce, Marcus is looking for you. Something about that game you were playing. Pierce gave me an apologetic look and left. Torrens and I were left alone. Nice restaurant, I said. Trying to start a conversation? Yes, one of the best in town, Torrens replied. Kiona insisted on it, although I would have preferred something more modern. How's the house purchase going? I asked, testing the waters for a conversation about the gift. It's moving forward, Torrens replied evasively. The bank has given preliminary approval, but the interest rate is higher than we expected. He was about to say something else, but at that moment Kiona approached us. She touched my shoulder lightly in imitation of a greeting, not even deigning to give me a formal kiss on the cheek. Garth, I'm glad you could make it. Her voice was as cold as her smile. Torrens, Bridget, and Alan just arrived. We should go greet them. She gave me a quick, appraising look, lingering on my worn suit, and led Torrens away. I was left alone in the middle of the room, feeling invisible. Deciding not to stand there like a pillar, I headed for the bar. Maybe a glass of wine would help me relax. The bartender, a young guy with a trendy beard, looked at me questioningly. Red wine, please, I asked, and something dry. He poured me a glass of dark ruby wine. I took a sip and walked away from the bar, watching the guests. Most of them were obviously Torrens' colleagues or Kiona's friends. Young, successful professionals discussing work, investments, travel. I didn't know any of them. About half an hour passed. During that time, Torrens never once approached me. I saw him moving from group to group, laughing, gesturing, clearly feeling in his element. Kiona followed him like a shadow, occasionally taking his arm or whispering something in his ear. Pierce was also busy. He was talking to several teenagers, apparently the children of other guests. At least he wasn't bored. I finished my wine and placed the empty glass on the tray of a passing waiter. At that moment, Torrens finally noticed me and headed in my direction. I cheered up, thinking that we would finally be able to talk. Dad, he said as he approached, could you help out? There's a line at the bar and several guests need wine. You're standing around doing nothing anyway. I didn't immediately understand what he was talking about. Do you want me to bring someone wine? Yes. Torrance nodded impatiently. Bridget and Alan at that table. He pointed to a middle-aged couple in the far corner. White dry for her, red for him, and Marcus, he nodded toward a heavy-set man at the snack table. Red for him too. I looked at my son in bewilderment. Was he really asking me to wait on his guests, instead of introducing me to them or at least talking to me? Noticing my confusion, Torrance frowned. Something wrong? It's a simple request. The waiters are busy, and you're just standing there anyway. I nodded slowly and walked to the bar, feeling a heavy lump growing inside me. This wasn't how I had imagined this evening. I hadn't come here to play the role of a waiter. After receiving 3 glasses of wine on a tray from the bartender, I carefully carried them across the room. Although I tried to be careful, the years had taken their toll. My hands were no longer as steady as they used to be. One of the glasses tilted dangerously, and a few drops of red wine fell onto the snow-white tablecloth of a passing table. Careful, Kiona said sharply, appearing at my side. That's an $80 bottle of Chablis. She snatched the tray from me and carried the wine to the guests herself, greeting them with a radiant smile, as if it were not a forced gesture, but a sign of hospitality. When she returned, she took me aside. Garth, she said quietly but emphatically, I understand that you wanted to congratulate Torrance, and that's commendable. But maybe you'd better sit down somewhere in the corner? There, she pointed to a table at the far end where no one was sitting. I'll bring you some snacks. I felt the blush of shame wash over my face. She was treating me like a decrepit old man who was tolerated out of politeness, but would be better off not being seen at all. I'm capable of getting my own snacks, I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. And I didn't come here to sit in a corner. Kiona pursed her lips. As you wish. Just try not to. She hesitated, searching for the right words. Try not to attract too much attention. Some of the guests are important colleagues of Torrance. You know, first impressions and all that. She smiled another of her fake smiles and left, leaving me feeling as if I'd been punched in the gut. I slowly walked over to the snack table, took a plate, and put some cheese and crackers on it, more for appearances than because I was hungry. My appetite was completely gone. The next hour was perhaps one of the most humiliating of my life. Torrance approached me several times, but only to ask me to do something. Bring napkins, pass a plate of canapes, make sure certain guest glasses were not empty. Not once did he introduce me to any of his friends or colleagues. He never once asked how I was feeling or how my business was going. I carried out his request mechanically, feeling the envelope in my jacket pocket grow heavier with every passing minute. $450,000. Money I intended to give to a man who treated me worse than a hired hand. At some point, the formal part of the evening began. Kiona asked everyone to take their seats at the tables, and I found that I had been seated in the far corner of the room, at a table where, besides me, there were only Pierce and 2 other teenagers, obviously friends of her grandson. Neither Torrance nor Kiona sat with us. Are you all right, Grandpa? Pierce asked quietly, apparently noticing the look on my face. Yes, kid, I'm fine, I lied, trying to smile. Pierce didn't look convinced, but he didn't press the issue, for which I was grateful. The toast began. One after another, Torrance's friends and colleagues rose to give speeches about his professionalism, his successes, his leadership qualities. Kiona talked about what a wonderful husband and father he was. No one asked me to make a toast. It was as if Torrance's story began at university, and everything that came before, his childhood, growing up, the years when Margaret and I supported him in everything, was irrelevant. After the toast, they began to bring out the hot dishes. I found that my plate was empty, while everyone else had already been served their first course. Excuse me, I called to a passing waiter. It seems I've been overlooked. I'm sorry, sir, the young man said, embarrassed. I was told you wouldn't be having a hot meal. That appetizers would be enough for you. I felt a wave of anger rising inside me. Who told him that? Torrance? Kiona? They didn't even bother to ask me. I would like a hot dish just like everyone else, I said, trying to speak calmly. Of course, sir. I'll bring it right away. The waiter hurried to the kitchen, and I looked around the room. Torrance was sitting at the central table, chatting animatedly with the guests. He didn't look my way once. Dinner arrived a few minutes later, steak with a side of vegetables. I mechanically ate a few bites, not tasting anything. Inside, I was becoming increasingly aware of the bitter truth. I was not a welcome guest at this celebration. I was a burden, an uncomfortable reminder of a past that Torrens would rather forget. After dinner, the informal part of the evening began. Music was turned on, and some couples got up to dance. I sat at my table watching the fun and feeling like a complete stranger. Pierce and his friends went to the other end of the hall, where, judging by their animated gestures, they were discussing some kind of game. I decided it was time to leave. I didn't belong here. But before I left, I wanted to talk to Torrens alone. Maybe it was naive, but I still hoped that some kind of understanding was possible between us. I found him at the bar, talking to a short, balding man in an expensive suit. Waiting for a pause in their conversation, I approached him. "Torrens, can I have a minute of your time?" My son turned to me with barely concealed irritation. "Dad, I'm a little busy. Alan and I are discussing an important work matter." "I understand, but I only need a minute." Torrens sighed and apologized to his companion. "Okay, what is it?" he asked, taking me aside. "I wanted to talk to you about your gift," I began. "The whiskey? Thank you, that's very kind." "No, not the whiskey. I have something else for you." I was about to take out the envelope, but at that moment, Kiona approached us. "Torrens, dear, everyone is waiting for you to cut the cake." "I'll be right there," he nodded, clearly pleased with the excuse to end our conversation. Turning to me, he said, "We can talk about this later, okay? Right now, I need to—" He was interrupted by a loud cry from the snack table. "Hey, we're out of wine." Torrens glanced quickly at me. "Dad, could you—" He nodded toward the bar. "Bring them some wine, please. And while you're at it, check if everyone has enough to drink." Without waiting for my answer, he took Kiona by the arm and headed for the center table, where a huge cake with lit candles was already standing. I stood watching them go and felt something break inside me. All my life I had tried to be a good father. I provided for my family, supported my son in all his endeavors, and rejoiced in his successes. And this is how it turned out. He saw me as nothing more than a free waiter at his party. Pour the wine. Serve the food. My hand reached for the inside pocket of my jacket, where the envelope with the check was. I took it out and looked at Torrens' name, written in my uneven handwriting. At that moment, applause broke out. Torrens had blown out the candles on the cake. Everyone around him was smiling, congratulating him, patting him on the shoulder. No one even glanced in my direction. I was invisible. The decision came suddenly but with absolute clarity. I put the envelope back in my inside pocket. Then I quietly walked over to my table, picked up my coat, and headed for the exit. As I passed Pierce, I squeezed his shoulder lightly. "I have to go, kid. Call me tomorrow, okay?" "Are you leaving already, Grandpa?" he asked in surprise. "But we haven't even cut the cake yet." "I'm not feeling well," I said, which wasn't entirely a lie. "Don't worry, everything's fine. Just call me tomorrow." Pierce nodded, though I could see the concern in his eyes. I quickly left the hall without looking back or saying goodbye to anyone else. I doubt anyone but Pierce even noticed my departure. Once in the parking lot, I took a deep breath of the cool evening air. For the first time all evening, I felt like I could breathe freely. Sitting in the car, I took out the envelope again and looked at it. Then I decisively put it in the glove compartment. Torrens won't get that money. Not today. Maybe never. Starting the engine, I drove out of the restaurant parking lot without looking back. For 3 days, I couldn't bring myself to sit down and write the letter. Every time I sat down at Margaret's table with a sheet of paper and a pen, the words eluded me. How could I explain to my son that I was taking back the promised gift? How could I put into words the pain and humiliation I had experienced on his birthday? Torrens didn't call. He probably didn't even notice my absence until the party was over. Pierce called the next day, as I had asked, but our conversation was short and awkward. I didn't tell him about my feelings and my decision not to give his father the money. The boy was already having a hard time, caught between his parents' coldness and his attachment to his grandfather. On the 4th day after the ill-fated holiday, I finally forced myself to pick up my pen. Sunlight streamed through the window, illuminating the worn surface of the old desk. Margaret's photograph looked at me with her usual half-smile. "Dear Torrens," I wrote and immediately crossed it out. Too formal, or conversely, too warm for the relationship that had developed between us. "Torrens," I began again. I sat there for 15 minutes staring at that single word. What else could I say? How could I describe the whole range of emotions that were overwhelming me? Anger, disappointment, bitterness, and somewhere deep down, the pain of a rejected parent. The phone rang, interrupting my torment. It was Aubrey. Garth, I thought I'd see how your prodigy's birthday went. Did you give him what you said you would? I sighed, not knowing where to start, and suddenly the words poured out. I told him everything, how Torrens had used me as a waiter, how Kiona had sat me far away from the important guests, how I had felt like a stranger and unnecessary at my own son's party. And you know what the worst part is, Aubrey? I said in conclusion. I wasn't even surprised. Part of me expected something like this. I just hoped that the check for $450,000 would change his attitude toward me, at least for a little while. There was silence on the other end of the line. You did the right thing taking the check, Aubrey finally said. Money won't buy you his respect. It will only confirm his opinion that you're only good for financial support. But what am I supposed to do with this money now, I asked, even though I already knew the answer. What would Margaret have done, Aubrey asked. She was always wiser than both of us. I looked at the photo of my wife. She would have said that life is too short to spend it waiting for recognition from those who are incapable of giving it. That we should use our time, energy, and resources on things that bring joy and meaning. Exactly, Aubrey said with a smile in his voice. So what about Yellowstone? My offer still stands. After talking to Aubrey, the words for the letter came naturally. I took a blank sheet of paper and began to write. Torrens, on your birthday, I plan to give you a check for $450,000. Enough to buy the house you talked about. Money I had saved my whole life, putting aside part of every paycheck, denying myself many things to ensure you had a better future. But that evening, I realized that my efforts had not produced the desired result. You have grown up to be successful in terms of your career and finances, but you have not learned to appreciate the people around you, at least not all of them. I was upset and offended by how you treated me at the restaurant. Not like a father, but like a servant. I decided not to give you the money. Not because I want to punish you or make you feel guilty. It's just that I finally realized that financial support is the only thing you are willing to accept from me. And that's not enough for me. I will spend this money on myself, on the trips your mother and I always dreamed of, but constantly put off until later, on exploring the geological wonders that have always interested me, on living the rest of my life to the fullest rather than waiting for your approval or attention. I will never stop loving you. You are my son, and nothing will change that. But I will no longer wait for you to one day see me as something more than a source of financial support. The door to my home is always open to you and your family, but only if you come as equals, with respect and a sincere desire to communicate. I will no longer agree to anything else. Your father, Garth Ellington, Betrayal. After rereading the letter, I felt a strange sense of relief. No malice, no accusations, just the truth, stated calmly and with dignity. I sealed the letter in an envelope, wrote Torrance's address on it, and set it aside to mail tomorrow. I spent the rest of the day at the computer, researching information about Yellowstone and other national parks. Over the years as a geologist, I had visited many interesting places, but always as part of work expeditions. I never had time to simply enjoy the beauty of natural wonders, to study them at my leisure, without the pressure of deadlines and the expectations of the company. I found a map of Yellowstone and marked the places I wanted to visit. Grand Prismatic Spring with its incredible colors, the Geyser Basin with the legendary Old Faithful, Mammoth Hot Springs with its travertine terraces. The list grew, as did my excitement. For the first time in a long time, I felt truly alive, full of energy and plans. By evening, I had already mapped out a rough itinerary and a list of necessary equipment. Of my old camping gear, I only had my boots and backpack left, and both were pretty worn out. I would have to buy new stuff. I smiled, imagining how surprised the salespeople at the outdoor store would be when a 72-year-old man came in to choose equipment for a long hike. The doorbell rang around 9 in the evening. I wasn't expecting any guests, and to be honest, I wasn't in the mood for visitors. But when I opened the door and saw Pierce standing on the doorstep with a backpack slung over his shoulder and his eyes red from crying, all my plans for the evening changed instantly. Pierce? What's wrong, kid? My grandson sniffed and tried to smile, but his lips trembled. Hi, Grandpa. Can I stay the night? I stepped aside, letting him into the house. Of course. Have you had dinner? He shook his head. I took him to the kitchen, sat him down at the table, and began to reheat yesterday's leftover stew. Pierce sat silently, slumped over and staring at the tabletop. Do your parents know where you are? I asked, placing a plate of food in front of him. No, he looked up at me. Please don't tell them. At least not for a couple of hours. I frowned. No matter how I felt about Torrance and Kiona, they had a right to know where their son was. Pierce, they'll be worried. No, they won't, he said with a bitter smile. They're too busy fighting to notice I'm gone. I sat down across from him. What happened? Pierce reluctantly poked at his stew with his fork. They're fighting over money again. About the house they want to buy. Dad accused Mom of spending too much on nonsense, and she yelled that he should have pressured you to help with the down payment. My heart sank, so I was right. They were counting on my money. And then, Pierce continued, when I tried to stop them, Dad yelled at me. He told me to stay out of grown-up business. And Mom, his voice faltered. Mom said I was as useless as you. He looked up at me, his eyes full of tears and guilt. I'm sorry, Grandpa. I shouldn't have said that. I reached out and squeezed his shoulder. It's okay, kid. Tell me everything. Pierce nodded and wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. After that, I just couldn't stay there. I grabbed my backpack, a few things, and left. They didn't even notice. We sat in silence for a while. Pierce ate quietly while I thought about the situation. Of course, I needed to call Torrance and let him know that his son was with me. But maybe not right away. The boy needed time to calm down, and I needed time to figure out the best course of action. Are they always like this? I asked cautiously. Do they fight a lot? Pierce shrugged. Lately, almost every day, usually about money or Dad's work. He's become obsessed with his new project and is hardly ever home. And when he does come home, he and Mom start arguing. He put down his fork even though he had barely eaten half of his meal. You know what's strange, Grandpa? When you and Grandma were together, I never saw you argue like that. You might have disagreed with each other, but you always spoke calmly. Why can't Dad be like that? I sighed. How do you explain the complexities of family relationships to a 16-year-old teenager? Your grandmother and I have been together for almost 50 years when I began. And believe me, we've had our share of difficulties and arguments. We just tried not to fight in front of you kids. And over time, we learned to resolve conflicts without yelling. Can't Mom and Dad learn that? There was hope in his voice. I don't know, Pierce. It depends on them, on their desire to preserve their family and respect for each other. I paused, searching for the right words. Your father? He's a good man at heart. It's just that somewhere along the way, he started to place too much importance on the external trappings of success. Money, status, recognition, and he forgot what was really important. Like you were at his birthday party, Pierce said quietly. I saw how he treated you, as if you weren't his father, but some kind of servant. So he did notice after all. I felt both bitterness and relief. Bitterness that my grandson had witnessed such humiliation, and relief that at least someone in the family saw what was really going on. Why didn't you say anything? Pierce asked. Why did you just leave? What was I supposed to say? I replied with a question. Start a scene at the party? That would only have confirmed your father and mother's opinion that I'm a rude, uneducated old man who doesn't know how to behave in polite society. I stood up and cleared the table. Sometimes silent departure is the most dignified response to disrespect. Pierce helped me wash the dishes. We worked side by side in cozy silence, each lost in our own thoughts. Grandpa, he finally said, did you really want to give Dad money for a house? I froze with the towel in my hands. How did he find out? Yes, I admitted. I was going to give him $450,000 to buy a house. But after the way he treated me on his birthday, I changed my mind. You did the right thing, Pierce said unexpectedly firmly. He doesn't deserve that kind of money. Not after the way he treated you. I was surprised by this mature judgment in a 16-year-old boy. It's hard to judge who deserves what, Pierce. I just realized that money wouldn't solve our problem. It would only create the illusion of a solution. We moved into the living room. On the coffee table were printouts of maps of Yellowstone and lists of equipment. Pierce looked at them with interest. Are you going on a camping trip? Yes, with your great-uncle Aubrey. To Yellowstone, and then maybe to other national parks. Cool, Pierce said sincerely. Can I come with you? I laughed. I'm afraid your parents wouldn't approve. Besides, you have school. But what about during the holidays? I thought about it. The idea of showing my grandson the wonders of nature that I had always admired was appealing. Maybe if your parents give their permission, I said cautiously, but it would have to be a separate, shorter trip. What Aubrey and I are planning isn't for teenagers. Lots of hiking, primitive conditions. Pierce looked disappointed but nodded understandingly. What are you going to do with the money you wanted to give Dad? I'll spend it on travel, I replied. All my life I've been saving money for a rainy day or for you and your father. But now I realize it's time to use it for myself while I still have the strength and health. We talked for about another hour. Pierce told me about school, his hobbies, and his dreams of becoming a marine biologist. I listened intently, surprised at how little I knew about his life. Torrance and Kiona rarely brought him to visit, and when they did, the conversations were usually superficial. At 10:30, I decided it was time to call Torrance. No matter how I felt about my son, his parents had a right to know where their child was. Pierce, I need to call your father, I said. They're probably frantic looking for you. He frowned but didn't argue. Just don't tell them I asked you not to call them right away, okay? Say I came home late or something like that. I nodded and dialed Torrance's number. He answered on the third ring. Dad, what's wrong? His voice sounded tense. I have Pierce here, I said without preamble. He came in about an hour ago, upset. He said you two had a fight. There was silence on the other end of the line, then a sigh of relief. Thank God. Kiona and I were about to call the police. I'll come and get him right now. He can stay at my place tonight if he wants, I offered. It's late, and he needs time to cool off. No, Torrance said. I'll come. Wait for me. He hung up without saying goodbye. I sighed and turned to Pierce, who was standing in the doorway, obviously eavesdropping. Your father is coming to pick you up. The boy's shoulders slumped. I knew it. I'm sorry I got you involved in this, Grandpa. You didn't get me involved in anything, I said, walking over and hugging him. I'm glad you came to me when you were feeling bad. Always come when you need to. My door is always open to you. We sat in the living room waiting for Torrance to arrive. I offered Pierce tea, but he declined. Instead, he continued to look at my Yellowstone printouts, asking questions about geysers and geological formations. I answered, delighted by his genuine interest. The doorbell rang 20 minutes later. I opened the door and saw Torrance, disheveled, with red eyes, wearing a jacket hastily thrown over his t-shirt. Where is he? He asked without greeting me. In the living room, I replied, stepping aside to let him into the house. Torrance walked past me and headed straight for the living room. I followed him, fearing conflict. Pierce, Torrance began from the doorway, can you imagine what your mother and I went through? We spent 2 hours looking for you all over the neighborhood. Pierce stood up, clutching a map of Yellowstone in his hands. Really? I thought you were too busy yelling at each other to notice I was gone. Torrance clenched his fists. Don't you dare talk to your father like that. Pack your things. We're going home. What if I don't want to? Pierce asked quietly but firmly. What if I want to stay with my grandfather? Torrance gave me an accusing look, as if I had turned the boy against him. You're a minor and you live with us. That's not up for discussion. I saw Pierce tense up, ready for a confrontation. I had to diffuse the situation. Pierce, I said gently, your father is right. It's better for you to go home, but you can always come visit me, anytime. Pierce looked at me with disappointment, but nodded and went to get his backpack. When he left the room, Torrance turned to me. I don't know what you said to him, but I didn't say anything to him, I interrupted. He came here upset because of his argument with Kiona. He just wanted to be somewhere peaceful. What's wrong with that? Torrance opened his mouth to argue, but at that moment, Pierce returned with his backpack slung over his shoulder. We went out onto the porch. The night was cool, and the stars shone brightly in the dark sky. Call me tomorrow, kid, I said, hugging my grandson goodbye. I will, Grandpa, he whispered, and thank you. Torrance watched us with an inscrutable expression on his face. As Pierce headed for the car, he paused for a second. Dad, He hesitated, as if he wanted to say something but couldn't find the words. Maybe apologize for his behavior at the birthday party, or thank me for taking care of his son. But the moment had passed. Thanks for calling, he said curtly, and headed for the car. I stood on the porch watching them drive away. Tomorrow I'll send the letter, and the day after tomorrow I'll start preparing for the trip. A new stage in my life, where there will be no room for waiting for recognition from a person who is incapable of giving it. I returned to the house and sat down again at the table where the sealed letter to Torrance lay. Perhaps this letter would not change our relationship. Perhaps it would only deepen the gulf between us. But I could no longer live in the hope that one day my son would see me as something more than a wallet or a free waiter. It was time to start living for myself.